Good evening, everyone. I am Gwendolyn Winston, the Executive Director of Wisdom Institute. We are grateful that you have joined us for this evening's teach-in on reproductive justice. Before we get started, we'd like to find out who you are. If you would put your name, your organization, if you're affiliated with an organization, in the chat, where you're located, and what you're hoping to get out of today's session. Give you a few minutes to enter that, and I'll continue. What wisdom knows is we have a chance to achieve reproductive justice and liberation. We are most excited about the opportunity to be spirit-centered healer, artists. We listen to the voices of Black women and the scholarship of our experiences. We stand together with Black, Indigenous women of color and our accomplices to ignite collective action. This evening's teach-in is to provide you with food for thought, what reproductive justice is, to ground you in some history, and to respond to the question that many of you have been asking, what's next?
Thank you. We're just looking in the chat to see what responses. What are you hoping to get out of this evening? And Bonsitu says she's looking forward to listening and learning from everyone here. Yes, we're looking forward to hearing and learning from you too, Bonsitu. So we ask everyone to please put your name, your organization, if you're affiliated with an organization, and your pronouns in the chat and what you're hoping to get out of today's session. So Bonsitu, or Amy says she's excited to learn from the amazing Bonsitu and from the rest of you. Yes. Dr. Opara from Wayne State, yes, she's hoping to be in community this evening and be grounded in reproductive justice, liberatory principles. Yes, Dr. Opara. Deneen, she's retired. She's hoping to gather additional information to be able to speak more confidently when talking about reproductive freedom. Yes, Angela from Kalamazoo, from YWCA, she's here to listen. She wants to be open and learn how she can help. Yes, there's so many people here. This is great. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Cicely Allen. I am the Director of Womanist Culture and Programming at the Wisdom Institute. I'm so happy to be here this evening. I'm honored to be here this evening. Before we get started, understanding how taxing the work of actualizing reproductive justice, how taxing it can be on our spirits, on our minds, on our bodies, we want to invite you to just take a moment to get centered and to get grounded and meditate in this beautiful moment. And so to lead us in that, we invited Reverend Nicole Miller of Divine Roots. Nicole is an ordained ministerial counselor and a mindset practitioner, and she's dedicated to making the healing journey with anybody that is choosing to experience and embrace new thoughts of wellness that lead to transformation. Thank you so much for joining us, Nicole.
Thank you so much for having me. I am excited. I'm excited to be here, and I'm really standing in gratitude and grateful for the opportunity to lend my voice and be heard in such a fashion of empowerment and the actualization of our freedom. And like Cicely stated, this work can be at times heavy. I remember when the announcement was made on the decision, I had the petitions in hand that was given to us by the Wisdom Institute to gather signatures, and my body started to vibrate. I felt such empowerment because that hand was the tool. And we utilized that tool, and within 24 hours or under 24 hours, we were able to gather 200 signatures. My one yes turned into 200 signatures, 200 voices being heard, and amplified the call to just recognize our right to be free, our right to be heard and to voice and make our choice for self. And so it's in that same vein that I invite us all right now in this collective oneness, in this space, in this excitement, with every intention that was set, to close our eyes and take a deep breath in. And then exhale. That together, our yes amplifies the yes of so many. Standing in the knowing that we are empowered and that we have a right to freedom. It is not to be requested, it is to be acknowledged, our right of freedom of choice. And we take a deep breath in and we release. As we stand in this knowing and we celebrate our yes to collectively come together to expand knowledge and ascend in wisdom, moving forward to heal thoughts of separation and to unite us as one. We take a deep breath in and we exhale. It is in this space that we find it easy to say yes and to move forward. We remove all struggle and we meet challenges with ease because we have the knowledge. And our roots are deepened in the ancient wisdom that breathes us. Take a deep breath in and release. In this one space, in one mind, namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole.
So who is the Wisdom Institute? The Wisdom Institute is a nonprofit organization. You can hear me, correct? Yes. So the Wisdom Institute is a nonprofit corporation. And we focus on the African American woman and girl in Detroit particularly, lifting the determination to advance the quality of our lives, our livelihood, and our leadership.
The Wisdom Institute employs a womanist praxis theory of change model that informs our practices, progressive programs, and services that champion reproductive justice, healing, gender, and racial justice. Our vision is for African American women to fully recognize our wisdom and invoke our power to build a collective community. At the Wisdom Institute, we believe that for reproductive justice to be real, we need to first understand that bodily autonomy is a human right. We deserve to have full control of our bodies. We also need to know that we're the ones that need to be deciding if we are to have children or not have children. And if we decide to have children, we need to be able to parent our children in safe, sustainable communities, which include access to clean, affordable water and other essential resources.
So as reproductive justice advocates, We approach our work, we call ourselves root women. We approach our work rooted in the human right to control our bodies, our sexuality, our gender, and our reproduction. We believe that this is a right, and it can only be achieved when all women, femmes, girls, and gender expansive individuals have the complete economic, social, and political power and resources to make healthy decisions in all areas of our lives, including our bodies, our families, and our communities.
So tonight we are honored to have Bonsitu Kitaba as a presenter. Just a bit about Bonsitu, who I'm realizing is a local celebrity. We're so honored to have her. She's the Deputy Legal Director at the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan, a 100-year-old civil rights organization dedicated to protecting the civil rights and liberties of everyone in the United States. At the ACLU, Bonsitu works on a range of cutting-edge civil rights cases, including litigating on behalf of a class of Black homeowners in Detroit who were subjected to illegal tax foreclosures, and Flint residents during the Flint water crisis to secure the replacement of all lead pipes in the city. Most recently, Bonsitu has led the ACLU's work to protect access to abortion in litigation and to enshrine the full spectrum of reproductive rights in our state constitution through the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot initiative, Proposal 3. Bonsitu is a graduate of the University of Toronto and Wayne State University Law School. Bonsitu, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Cicely, and thank you, Gwen and Amy, for having me here. It's a real pleasure, and I'm so excited to dive in and talk and be in conversation with all of you. So as I wait for a screen share, I will introduce myself. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I think what I want to highlight from the work that I do at the ACLU is primarily the work that I have sort of created a niche for myself. I see exactly the goals of reproductive justice as sort of my personal mission and values in the reproductive justice and the civil rights world. So as Cicely and Gwen mentioned, we cannot have bodily autonomy and decide our reproductive justice futures if we don't have access to the basic fundamental human rights, such as access to clean water, affordable housing, stable housing, and stable environments to raise or not raise children in. And so the work that I do at the ACLU, I see as very complementary to the work that we're going to talk about today. And it says that the host has disabled participant screen sharing. Okay, let me try that again. Yes, got it. All right. Can everyone see my screen? Fantastic. All right. So I want to take us on a journey today and talk a little bit about our path that we're going to journey on together. So I feel like we can start off by some guiding principles. We had a great introduction to meditation with Nicole. Thank you so much for grounding us in this space today. And then we are going to talk about what the term reproductive justice means and how that framework differs from some other terms around reproductive rights, reproductive health care, and reproductive freedom. And after hearing about that framework, I'm going to ask you all to reflect on how reproductive justice shows up in the experiences that you've had in your past or in your current reality or even your future goals for your life. And then I want to talk about the work that's going on in Michigan on the ground to push for the reality of reproductive justice in our state. And I want to end, and we'll do this at the end of our closing session, towards the end of our session, talking about our collective vision, your individual and our collective vision for a world in which reproductive justice is the norm. Great. And so here are some guiding principles that I thought would be appropriate for today. We're going to be talking about issues that are often deeply personal, touches on race and racism, sex, gender identity, abortion, reproductive health care, discrimination, among many others. And I want this to be a reminder that we come from a place of understanding and compassion in this space, that we're engaging our active listening skills and moving up to speak and moving back to make space for others to speak as well. I think this work and this conversation, these types of conversations are so highly personal, as we're going to be talking and sharing about our lived experiences and those of especially many of us who share the identity as being BIPOC individuals. But just, you know, as we all know, we're here speaking on behalf of ourselves, not our entire race or our gender identity. And so I'm going to ask you for our first participatory part of this evening that we're going to share together, if everyone can drop into the chat, or even if you want to come off mute and share just one word about how you're showing up to this session today. Are you excited? Are you joyful? Are you stressed? Are you exhausted or anxious? It's okay. We are at the end of the day, and we want to recognize that everyone has graciously taken the time out of their evening to come to this session and to put their other life responsibilities on hold for the moment. So we really appreciate that. And feel free to drop that in the chat at any time, and read what other people and how they're showing up to this space as well. And because I'll be asking you to share about your experiences in your life, I think I'll share a little bit about myself first. As we all know, my name is Bonsitu Asia Kitaba Gavilio. I was born in Ontario, Canada, just outside of Toronto. My parents, my mom and dad, immigrated from Ethiopia and Guyana, respectively. And I see myself as really identifying the mixture of African and Indian ancestry. I lived and grew up in a country, Canada, which was very multicultural and diverse in many ways, and embraces the values that I really enjoyed living in that community, which really was not a melting pot, but really a mosaic of different cultures and experiences that we all learned from, grew up together, and could participate in. But even that society, even as grand and beautiful as that was not perfect. And I wanted to expound on the experiences of my parents fleeing their countries for persecution, for expressing their personal views and their political views, and use any amount of privilege and education that I was able to obtain to help others to achieve those basic human rights, to achieve a diverse and rich community. And I moved to Detroit to pursue school over 10 years ago. And here I have learned and soaked up all the experiences. I've built a life here with my husband and my 2 sons while I pursue my legal career. And I've had my own reproductive healthcare journey. I have 2 sons. I've had miscarriages. I have experienced pause when dealing with healthcare professionals in my healthcare journey, which made me think twice about the type and level of care that I was receiving. And in my legal work, I pursue systemic change that I really think, and I mentioned before, goes to the heart and the goals of achieving reproductive justice. So thank you so much for dropping those words in the chat. I see everyone's comments: attentive, anxious but motivated, seeking to understand, deeply interested and needing information, open, motivated, caring, excited, determined, eager. I love all of these. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's dive in. So I think before we can really dive into understanding reproductive justice, we have to understand the terms that we have probably come to hear often, and really they're not interchangeable. So I want to sort of distinguish reproductive justice from some other common terms and phrases that we've often heard. So today we're focused on the unique term of reproductive justice, and that phrase has its own meaning and its own history. And so when we're clear about when we're using reproductive justice, I also want to highlight these three other terms. Reproductive rights. This is advocacy centered on the individual legal rights to reproductive healthcare services, with a focus on keeping access to abortion, to contraception, to birth control, legal and open for everyone to access. It also involves creating standardized principles for sex education and increasing access to family planning services. And reproductive rights is contrasted with reproductive health care, which has more of a focus on the direct services of a person's individual reproductive health care needs. So if you go to your doctor and you seek out reproductive health care, or you go to Planned Parenthood, or you go to an independent abortion clinic, you're seeking out reproductive health care services. And lastly, reproductive freedom is an umbrella term that encompasses all of these ideas and focuses on the freedom to make decisions about one's own body. By contrast, reproductive justice is defined by its founding organization's sister song as, and I have the quote here, the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, to have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe, sustainable communities. Reproductive justice is a framework and a lens that reflects the ways that racism, anti-Blackness, xenophobia, misogyny, capitalism, structural inequality contribute to the erasure and marginalization of people that are seeking reproductive health care and reproductive rights, and the ways that they impact one's own ability to create families on their own terms. The term itself was coined in 1994 at a conference in Chicago, in which Black women came together and recognized that the women's rights movement that was led and representing middle-class, wealthy white women could not defend the needs of women of color and other marginalized women and transgender people. Black women, they identified, needed to lead their own national movement to uplift the needs of the most marginalized women, their families, and their communities. And while they recognized that this work has been ongoing for centuries before them, these women brought these ideas together under the term reproductive justice. They created this framework that was rooted in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, because they view, and I view, reproductive justice as a human right, not only to address the right to make choices, but really focuses on the access and the environment that one must survive in order to be able to make those decisions about your reproductive future freely. And because we all know that choices are almost never made freely unless barriers to access are removed, that is why reproductive justice is an essential part of the reproductive freedom framework. Reproductive justice strives for a world that achieves these three tenets. It strives for a world where people will have access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care, including abortion, contraception, prenatal care, gynecological care, and gender-affirming care, as well as comprehensive sex education. In addition, it seeks out a world that is free from state-sanctioned violence and government systems that coerce and harm families. And lastly, the vision of reproductive justice can't be achieved without racial and economic equality or equity, and the ability to decide if, when, and how to grow our families. So I want to stop sharing my slides for a moment. I have just sort of talked about the reproductive justice framework, and there are many, many systemic issues and systems at play. I think we also simultaneously have to recognize how our ancestors and how the history of the United States and generations have suffered through exploitation, and how those histories live within our own bodies today, within our society, within the patterns and structures of the way that our systems operate today, and the way that they impact stereotypes and stigmas that still persist in our healthcare, our reproductive justice, our reproductive rights world today. We can't forget how the creation of reproductive care like gynecology and the birth control pill were created on the exploitation of Black enslaved women and Puerto Rican women's bodies, respectively. And think about how that shows up in the ways that we access or are treated in our healthcare settings today. So now I want to sort of dive into a little bit of the history that underpins sort of the structural inequalities that reproductive justice framework is trying to dismantle. And I just want to pause for a moment to acknowledge that the history that I might go through is very painful to hear. So brace yourselves, but probably nothing that all of you reproductive justice warriors have not heard before. As I don't have to tell any of you that this country has a troubling history of experimentation on Black bodies and Black women in particular. Today, we know that Black women are 3.5 times more likely to die during childbirth than white women because medical complications aren't treated and because their voices are ignored. Black patients continue today to receive less pain medication for broken bones, for cancer, for reproductive health care. Black children receive less pain medication than white children for appendicitis. And why is that? We're built no different than anyone else, but it's because this country and its systems are built on racist understandings of pain tolerance for Black people and a reluctance to hear the voices of these individuals. The origin of this failure to recognize the pain of Black patients can be traced as far back as the origin and the history of American medicine. And I want to briefly go into that history. Dr. James Marion Sims was a 19th century physician, and he had been dubbed the father of modern gynecology. He is honored currently in the United States with 3 statues, including one in Central Park. And one of those statues describes him as treating both empresses and slave women. But the advances that he made in gynecology were as a direct result of the brutal experimentation that he did on enslaved women. The identity of these women were largely silenced over the years and have recently been uncovered. And just 3 of those women, their names are Lucy Zimmerman, Betsy Harris, and Anarcha Westcott. They have now been dubbed the mothers of gynecology. Dr. Sims was born in South Carolina in 1813, and he was a clinician and a plantation physician. Starting around 1845, he started to conduct experiments on enslaved women who had recently given birth. Many of these women experienced vaginal tearing as a result of childbirth, which prolonged their recovery time and by extension, harmed the plantation owners' economic value in those enslaved women to be workers and produce more children. By experimenting on these enslaved women, Dr. Sims was able to perfect a technique to repair vaginal fistulas, which is an opening and a tear that is caused during childbirth. Between 1845 and 1849, he did a series of experimental surgeries on enslaved women and used stitches to close these openings. These were extremely painful surgeries, and they were performed without anesthesia. There was a belief at that time, and we see a through line until today, that Black women, Black people, especially Black women, were not able to feel pain or were more tolerant to pain than other women. And for a long time, these surgeries didn't work, and these women continued to suffer. These experimental surgeries went on until 1849, and finally, after 30 repeated surgeries on the same women, Dr. Sims was able to perfect his technique. This woman's name is Anarcha. She was a 17-year-old enslaved woman who had undergone a traumatic delivery, and some say that she was in labor for about 3 days. Dr. Sims experimented on her and became the father of gynecology as a result. We do not know if these women wanted these surgeries or what protests they were able to put up against it. Dr. Sims himself has acknowledged or said at least one of these women really wanted the surgery, but of course the voices of the women themselves are not documented in history. He also did treat and experiment on white women, but treated them with anesthesia during those surgeries. So we see those inequalities and that bias coming through. For centuries, Black women's bodies were used for sex, for production, and for reproduction. And the history of experimentation on Black bodies did not stop with Dr. Sims. It did not stop in the mid-19th century, but it continued into modern history. Some might have heard of Margaret Sanger. She is a nurse. She was a nurse and Planned Parenthood's founder. She was also part of a movement that performed medical procedures on Black men and women without their consent. Sanger was part of the eugenics movement, which forcefully sterilized Black men and Black women. Eugenics, as you might know, is the theory that society can be improved through planned breeding for quote unquote desirable traits like intelligence and industriousness. And even Sanger admitted that she believed that sterilization was necessary for the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic. In 1939, Sanger announced a project called the Negro Project to spread contraception and sterilization, specifically within the Black community. And she did so by identifying Black leaders and clergy to spread the word and open clinics in Black communities. But that too was met with skepticism and further deepened the racial inequality in reproductive health care. So the reproductive justice lens and framework takes into account this history, this atrocious history of experimentation and marginalization of Black bodies. And it looks at the inequities that are inherent and embedded in our structures today and tries to unearth those and dismantle them. I want to pause and take a breath for a moment because that was a lot of information and sort of reflects on a very painful history. And so before I go in, I just want to collectively take a moment and pause there. So now we've heard what the reproductive justice framework is. We've heard some of the history that underpins the movement towards reproductive justice. And I want to now turn to reflections from you, and I want to really engage this audience, if you feel comfortable, to give reflections on what you've heard so far. The reproductive justice movement seeks to address this intersectional oppression. And we know that there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we're not single identity people. We're not single issue people. Just as the mother of intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw herself acknowledged, we have to look at how our environment impacts our freedom. And yes, reproductive rights and reproductive health care is a lot about abortion, but reproductive justice is not just about abortion. Women of color and other marginalized women also have often felt difficulty accessing basic reproductive health care, such as contraception, comprehensive sex education, STI prevention care, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and postnatal care. And the idea that without the environment to raise and make decisions about one's family, we won't be able to do that freely if we don't have access to clean water, to stable housing, to be able to make these choices. So now I want to sort of turn it over to the audience and hear from you. Feel free to put it in the chat or come off mute. I've talked about this reproductive justice framework and what it means and the history, and I want to hear your reflections about this idea, what it means to you, what it's raising up for you, and any reflections that you might have. Thanks, Desiree. Go ahead.
Wow, I really appreciate hearing from you, Bonsitu. I was invited here by Cicely, who is like my community daughter, and I love her so much, and I didn't. Your name, Bonsitu, was attractive to me because, you know, I know you and I feel like we are kindred spirits. But I honestly felt like I'm not going to learn anything. I'm not going to hear anything I don't know. And you know, I'm tired and, you know, why do it? You know, I was playing with my, you know, toying with it in that way, but I am so happy that I came. And yeah, it's true, I didn't learn anything. I didn't hear you say anything I didn't know already, but hearing it, the way you told it with so much poignance. I mean, it just really sent chills up my spine. And I've needed to have this information all in one place many times, and I've just kind of just made up stuff, you know, not made up. I mean, I know kind of, you know, I know some basic facts, so I just say them, but I never knew really, I certainly never knew the names of these women, and, you know, just really, really rich detail. And I really hope that you have it written somewhere that's available that you could share with us. Oh wow, there was something else I wanted to say, but you know, there are a lot of people here, so I'm gonna maybe I'll remember and get back in the queue again. But just thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. I appreciate that. Dr. Opara?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Sister Bonsitu, and thank you, Wisdom Institute, Sister Cicely, everyone here. Greetings to each and every single one of you. And thank you, Sister Bonsitu, for that just highly eloquent dissertation on the subject. And really grateful for, you know, creating the space that you have in the ways that you have done it on this evening. I just came home from clinic, just kind of rushing, trying to do my whole decontamination and while listening. And this is material that I teach about. And by the way, just to give some background, I'm a physician, internal medicine and pediatric physician, but I say I practice Black libertarian medicine. And I lead work in health justice, anti-racism, anti-colonialism, in terms of workforce development for healthcare professionals, not just here in Michigan, but nationwide, but and globally. I wear global hats. And so that's what informs so much of my work. And I have so many thoughts and feelings, but I just want to name two in respect of the number of people we have here and the time we have with each other. One is that global peace, right? As I hear this story, and I know you just pulled two examples, which is Planned Parenthood and Miriam Sims. And the truth of the matter is that you can really pretty much multiply that over 50, 100, 1,000 throughout the African diaspora in similar type of practices that have impacted Black women worldwide. Right? We have so many examples from the continent of Africa, from the Caribbean, through the Americas, North, Central, and South, Asia, Black folks, because, you got Black folks everywhere, and in the ways in which white supremacy finds a way. Right. So I'm just sort of reflecting on that as I think through similar examples, through quote unquote foreign aid and international policies and practices and global health, etc., which have been vehicles for transporting, these white supremacist attacks on our bodies as Black peoples, and specifically as Black women and birthing people. And so I'm just thinking about how the playbook doesn't change, right? And it's the same playbook regardless. And the second thought that's coming up for me is the ways in which the state, the government, is part of this process and practice as well. And so you gave this example of Miriam Sims, an example of, Margaret Sanger. I'm also thinking of Mississippi appendectomies. I'm also thinking of, state-sanctioned eugenics programs throughout the country, particularly the South, but there are examples in the North as well. State-sanctioned hysterectomies done without, and sterilizations without the consent of the women. These were state sanctioned, as I reflect on the moment that we're in currently. And it's just a reminder that history is not the past. History is ongoing. History is the present and the future, right? This myth of the linearity of progress, it's a myth. This sense that, time just kind of marches on and we just get better. We don't. It is a cycle, and it requires active, vigilant action to interrupt a certain, course. There's a certain course of events that will actualize if there is not attention paid and vigilant action, executed. So folks kind of think that, things just naturally get better. They don't. And things will just kind of go a certain direction. It doesn't. It requires the blood, sweat, and tears of folks that interrupt a natural course of action in order to benefit all of us. So I want to end my comments there, and I appreciate you for, the offering on this evening, and looking forward to continuing to learn.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I appreciate that reflection too, because, I pulled out these few examples of how our history informs our structures today and the reproductive justice movement. But you're absolutely right that these examples are far-reaching, they're global, they are embedded, entrenched in all parts of the world. And what I was going to sort of go into next was exactly that idea of where we're at today in terms of state-sanctioned violence against Black bodies through our courts and through what's happening on a state-by-state level right now. But thank you so much for that. Any other sort of reflections from anyone else that you want to share? Okay, let's continue. Thank you so much for those words. I want to sort of now move from where the framework, we discussed the framework, we discussed the history, and now we're going to talk about what is happening in today's world. And many of you know that the attack on reproductive rights is sort of at the forefront, at the head of a lot of the political discourse that's currently being highlighted. But I want to talk about sort of the idea that reproductive rights is sort of the floor of where we need to be, and that reproductive justice is so much richer and beyond just achieving that floor of reproductive rights. And that floor has now officially been eroded underneath us. As many of you already know, in late June, the US Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, which had protected or affirmed that every individual had a right to reproductive freedom through abortion. But we all know that the promises of Roe were always a pipe dream for many people, including BIPOC women. And even though we had that protection for almost 50 years, the erosion of that protection has now given way and is yet another example of the state allowing Black bodies, Black lives to be further marginalized and controlled by the state. When you criminalize abortion, when you make it a crime to either perform an abortion or to seek out an abortion, the state is intentionally creating a system in which people that are already facing marginalization, facing barriers to access, will continue to be criminalized and put into those situations. People in rural communities, people that are LGBTQ, young people, BIPOC people, people with lower socioeconomic statuses. And so our right to decide to receive an abortion is now dependent on which state you live in, which is the epitome and the exact opposite of what our constitutional rights should be able to protect. And so right now we're in a state by state battle to elect officials that will speak to our values, to pass ballot measures that speak to our values, and do everything that we can to ensure that our right to have an abortion is protected. But turning it over to the states themselves is an act of violence by the Supreme Court, because I would say that to actually access the levers of power requires power and influence and wealth. And so even accessing a ballot measure to amend your state constitution, what we're trying to do here in Michigan, is a very costly, time-consuming, inaccessible democratic process. And so what the Supreme Court has done is essentially created even a higher bar for each state to determine whether the right to abortion is protected in their state. And I'm happy to say that there are groups that are trying to be on the ground, that are trying to make those processes, those democratic, quote unquote, democratic processes more accessible. And one of those examples is the Reproductive Freedom for All movement. But it is a very, very tough battle that each state is going to have to go through. And many states will never be able to amend their state constitution, will never be able to protect access to abortion in their modern history, because of gerrymandering, because of the political makeup of their state, because of other systemic issues. And so I feel positive and also reluctant to celebrate what's happening in Michigan. But I do want to share what we're doing in Michigan to ensure that the right to abortion and reproductive health care in general is protected. So again, I want to share my screen, and I want to talk a little bit about the Reproductive Freedom for All campaign. And you probably have heard about this campaign already. It's Proposal 3. It's on the ballot. Ballots are out. You can vote for it in November. But I want to give you a little bit of the history of how this proposal came to be. And it was because me and my colleagues sat down many years ago and we said, we see a problem with barriers to accessing the most fundamental basic reproductive health care in our state, especially for BIPOC women, for Black, Indigenous women of color. And we need to do something to create long-lasting protections for these rights to be a floor in our state constitution, so that the work that we do, the reproductive justice work that organizations are doing, the reproductive health care work that people are doing, can build upon that floor and make reproductive justice a reality in our state. And so we started talking to in-state stakeholders, and we started to talk to the Michigan Voices table. We started to talk to the Wisdom Institute. We started to talk to legal scholars in state and national about how we can make this a reality. And first we asked people, what was your vision? What is your vision of reproductive health care, reproductive rights in your state? And resoundingly, we heard that we don't just need to protect the right to abortion, we need to protect the full spectrum of reproductive health care. We need to protect access to contraception and sterilization and prenatal and postnatal care and abortion and miscarriage management and infertility care. And if we can secure those basic rights, then we can build on it. And that's what we heard from people. We heard that they wanted to build on these basic rights. And so when we were drafting the constitutional amendment, we knew that we had to go this route because that's the most evergreen and long-lasting way that we can protect these rights if it's embedded within the language of our state constitution and it's not subject to interpretation or reinterpretation or overturning by a court in another generation. And so the constitutional amendment affirms that every individual has a fundamental right to reproductive freedom. And that means the right to decide and effectuate those decisions about all matters related to pregnancy, including birth control, pre- and postnatal care, miscarriage, abortion, and infertility. And the ballot measure, I'm telling you, is a hard-fought one. We barely made it to the ballot, but we are on the ballot now. And it has cost a lot of money to get there. And we've been trying to move this campaign in a way that's really authentic and reflects our values. But we're still at a critical point where we need the majority of Michiganders to vote yes on Proposal 3 so that we can actually see this reality in our state constitution. And throughout this campaign, I wanted to also highlight that we know that a very dynamic and powerful voting bloc, voting group in our state is Black women. And we know that they can influence elections, and we know that if they have the right information and if they're equipped with the right information, that they will vote these values. And the messaging needs to reflect that. And some of the messaging does, and some of the messaging is really focused on those old, antiquated ideas about the women's rights movement. And so part of the struggle, I think, that we see reflected in this campaign is the tension between the historical women's rights movement and the forward-thinking, diverse idea and framework of reproductive justice. So what I want everyone to take away from this, from talking about the Reproductive Freedom for All ballot initiative, is that yes, we need to get out there and we need to vote for it and we need to embed these words in our state constitution, but it is not going to be the be all and end all of reproductive justice, that we'll be able to secure these basic rights, but then we are going to need many, many, many years of both litigation and advocacy and organizing to ensure that we have the environment necessary for every individual, regardless of their race, regardless of their identity, to actually be able to access and fully enjoy the constitutional rights that we have passed ourselves. And so that, I think, is really the reproductive justice goal for this campaign. And a complementary strategy that goes along with the Reproductive Freedom for All campaign is the litigation strategy that we also developed alongside it. We knew that the Supreme Court was poised to overturn Roe v. Wade, and we knew that Michigan had a law on its books from 1931 that criminalized all abortion care, or most abortions. And so we plan to file this lawsuit on behalf of Planned Parenthood in April to stop that 1931 law from going back into effect, while we continue to pursue the long-term goal of getting the constitutional amendment passed. And the governor also filed a lawsuit on the same day, and those lawsuits are proceeding. I'm so happy to report that in the Planned Parenthood case, we got a final judgment from the Court of Claims declaring that that 1931 law is unconstitutional and can't be enforced. But that is still an opinion of a trial court. It has to be appealed. It is being appealed by our opponents, the Michigan legislature, Right to Life, and the Catholic Conference. And so that opinion will continue to make its way up through the courts. Just as the Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs, it is also subject to reinterpretation and overturn by a subsequent court down the road. So really, it reinforces the need to have a constitutional amendment, to have those words embedded in our state constitution. And I want to just close by saying that, you know, I know that some people wrote in the chat early on that they are coming here to get information, to know what they need to do. And so I will encourage everyone to really encourage yourself and others to create a plan for how you're going to vote in November. We have no reason absentee voting in our state, thanks to a constitutional amendment that was passed in 2018. And now everyone can receive an absentee ballot and vote from the comfort of your home. So create a plan for voting. Encourage your family members and other people in your circle to also create a plan for voting. I feel like if you leave it up to the last minute, and I'm probably preaching to the choir anyway, but if we leave it to the last minute, things come up and we might not make it to the polls. This is an especially important election, and I will not talk about politics because we're a nonpartisan organization, but because of the ballot questions, the constitutional amendments that are on the ballot this year. These are really citizens-led ballot initiatives that go directly to the people without legislative interference. And so it's up to us to decide whether we want to reflect these values in our state constitution. And I encourage all of you to vote on those measures. Talking to your community. It's so important. Talking to family and community about the constitutional amendment, about reproductive justice. We know that especially Black women are a transformative group of voters, like I mentioned. I think that we need to reach our people and have the conversations in our language with our people in our community so that they know what's on the line and they are equally activated and motivated as we all are. And then if you want to get further involved and learn more, I encourage you to go to myreproductivefreedom.org and learn more about the ballot initiative, and you can volunteer and sign up to do canvassing or other forms of engagement as well. So I just wanted to leave you with those pieces of engagement and actions and calls to action. And then I will wrap up and take any questions that anyone has. Okay.
Are reproductive rights covered by health insurance? Abortion and, you know, those areas that you mentioned, are they covered by our health insurance once it becomes law?
So currently, abortion care is not covered under Medicaid. And also, if you have private insurance, you have to get a specific rider on your insurance to get abortion care covered. Other forms of reproductive health care, like birth control, some of those forms are covered and some aren't. The ultimate goal that I talked about, securing these rights and then building on them in the future, this is one of the goals, getting Medicaid funding for the full spectrum of reproductive health care, because we know once it is a constitutional right, the state has an obligation to ensure that every individual is receiving and enjoying those constitutional rights. So that is the next step. That's where we're going to build. That's where we're going to continue to need to litigate this issue for many years to come. And that's just one issue. There are other similar types of issues that we'll have to battle down the road. Desiree, go ahead.
Okay, there are two things that I would like for you to comment on. One of them is with respect to the ballot proposal. You know, the response that I'm seeing in the ad, at the ads is a pretty powerful one. You know, they're carving out all these different types of regulations that they say will be obliterated by this provision, including the requirement that abortion care providers be physicians. They claim, they say, they claim that. So I really would love to hear the response and the pushback that needs to be had to those allegations. And can I just give you my other one too? It's totally different. You probably know that there's a prevalent belief or viewpoint. This is about reaching our people, okay? There's a prevalent viewpoint within a certain category of Black men, African-centered, culturally conscious, nationalistic Black men who, with knowledge and understanding about all that history that you talked about with Margaret Sanger and Dr. Sims and Fannie Lou Hamer and all, the Hoteps, that they strongly take the position that abortion is part of the genocidal plan. And and that so any advocacy, and so then this goes back to all of those old roots about whether Black women should participate in feminism or not, and then we developed an intersectionality analysis that gave us the space that we needed, but they're still back there with the women's libers are destroying the Black community. So I'm just saying that what I need, I need help responding to that as well.
Yeah, great questions. The second one is a lot harder than the first one, but I will attempt to answer. And I also encourage other people to chime in too. But as far as the opposition messages are concerned, we know that the primary goal of the opponents are to make all abortions illegal in our state, no matter what. And so their attempt to sort of pick apart and try to dismantle the constitutional amendment and say that it will be a no holds bar, sort of lawless, unregulated practice is really a distraction, and it comes down to just blatant lies. So the constitutional amendment does not prevent the state from regulating abortion, just as it does any other form of healthcare. It balances the state's interest in keeping healthcare and abortion safe with the individual's interest to exercise their reproductive freedom. So just as your doctor is required to get a license to perform medicine and a particular type of medicine, that form of regulation will still apply to abortion care, and all of the stringent requirements that are required in healthcare settings to make healthcare safe will still be required. What they're afraid of is all of those laws that were passed by the legislature and by their special interest groups that were not medically necessary, that put a greater burden on abortion care providers because they were specifically designed to shut those doors, to shut those businesses down, and to shut those clinics down. And so those regulations will be, all of the regulations, essentially all of the laws, will have to be lined up side by side with the constitutional amendment by a court and determined, does it violate an individual's fundamental right to reproductive freedom, or does it balance the state's interest with that individual right, or does it not? And so that process will have to be undergone over a series of lawsuits over time. But really what it comes down to is most of what they're saying will never come to pass, will never happen. Abortion and reproductive health care will still be regulated to make sure that they're safe healthcare procedures. It just won't allow the state to burden abortion and reproductive health care more than other forms of healthcare.
So an example that you might concede then would be the laws that affected the right of a minor to have abortion without parental consent.
So under the constitutional amendment, every individual will have that fundamental right to reproductive freedom, including minors.
Yeah.
But there are laws on the books that regulate the interests of minors because they are young, and they're different rights than parents' rights, and they're different rights than adults' rights. And there are many laws on the books right now that provide two different categories for minors and for adults, like our regulation of alcohol and cigarette purchasing. So that individual, the minor's individual right to reproductive freedom will have to be balanced with the constitutional right, will have to be balanced with the state's interest in protecting minors. And so we don't know ultimately where those laws will fall, but there will have to be a discussion and a debate around it at some point after we pass this measure.
Yeah.
But those laws also, and I want to remind everyone that really what we're trying to do is restore the protections that we had under Roe v. Wade. And when they were dismantled, we need to just resurrect those protections. It creates the exact same standard that was in Roe. And those laws, such as parental consent and for minors, those laws were still on the books under Roe. So they have a strong likelihood of success even after the constitutional amendment is passed.
Okay. And the Hotep question?
Yeah. So I think what it comes down to for me is engaging in a discourse around what it means to decide what happens to one's own body, right? If an individual's right to decide is taken away and put into someone else's hand, especially of politicians, of the state, of a court, then whose life gets to be controlled and who's not? So a man's right to reproduce is not really, I mean, they don't have an ability to reproduce, so burdening their right to reproduce doesn't affect them. It only affects women, people who identify as women, people who can reproduce. And so I think the history also shows us that our systems, our policies, our practices have been designed to control the reproductive freedom, the reproductive futures of women, to put them in a box of homemaker, of mother, of family, rather than into the freedom that men get to enjoy, which is to design their own future regardless of these barriers. And so we are just trying to be able to exercise that freedom to decide what happens to our own bodies. And it ultimately should be our choice. If we identify with a certain philosophy or political view, and we never ever want to have an abortion, and we want to just reproduce and be a mother and a homemaker, that should be our right to decide. But if we don't, if we want to do something else with our life, I think we should have the freedom to do that just as men do. And that's what I would say, but
that won't work, but okay.
Mama Desiree, you know I interface with some Hotep brothers, and it's
Girl,
always like,
what would you say, Cicely?
You know, I was thinking about certain people whom we have
I know,
in common.
But it's almost like, how far will this go? If we allow this, who's to say that the state won't decide to make you have 10 kids? Or, how far will this go? How far will this go? And are you heading your household? Really? If you can't, if you're not in the position, or your loved one is not in the position to make the decision. And that usually, kind of ends the conversation there when you say, well, are you heading it or is the state heading it? And it's like, oh, no.
Exactly.
Yeah, just do you want the white man to do it? And then it shut it down right there.
You already know, yes.
You want it in the hands of politicians, right? That don't look like you. And also, what we learn from the words of the Supreme Court decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization and Justice Thomas, what he was saying in his opinion was that the right to bodily integrity, the right to decide what happens to your own body, applies not only to abortion, but should apply to destroy all the other Supreme Court decisions, all the other constitutional rights that rely on that idea. So, you know, he called out specifically same-sex relationships, same-sex marriage, contraception. The one that he didn't call out was interracial marriage. Very convenient. But that still relied on the same idea of deciding what happens to your own life, to your own body, right? So
yeah, because you know, I guess just for the benefit of folks who may not know the legal construct of it, the whole idea of Roe was predicated on this right. I think I'm right about this. Bonsitu knows this way better than me, but it's predicated on this right to privacy that actually doesn't even exist in the Constitution. It exists, it was said to be found in the penumbras of the Constitution, which literally means shadows. So they just pulled, you know, they kind of pulled it out of their ass, to be honest, over time when dealing with, because there was nothing in the Constitution to protect interracial marriage or right to contraceptive, not explicitly.
exactly.
Dr. Opar's hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about what, you know, the last thing that was said by Mama Desiree, and thinking about, you know, related to this quote unquote right to privacy, but just the 14th Amendment period, right, which you know, involves reproductive rights in terms of Roe v. Wade, but not anymore, but also Brown versus Board of Education, Bush v. Gore in terms of election recounts, gender discrimination, and racial quotas in education, so affirmative action. And it's mind-boggling the ways in which all the pieces of the fabric of our society is touched by this action here. And so we're truly fighting for our lives in every aspect of it. And I think part of the messaging, speaking of our dearly beloved brothers and some sisters, let's be real, you know, it's really to highlight the fact that these are all I hate to use the word. I love the word because it's everything, which is intersectional, but it's a trigger word for many of them. You know, you say intersectionality, they be like feminist, you know, they're ready to. So, but it truly is literally intersectional, but really highlighting the ways in which it affects the things that they care about. And I really like that idea around, like, you know, those unfortunate patriarchal you know, tenets that, you know, is really important to them, but seeing how, well, that cannot be aligned with, you know, the state running your household could be a way. But it also lifts up a space where our brothers, you know, our brothers who are like-minded can be, you know, true co-conspirators or co-liberators, I like to say, in this space, and maybe part of the challenge in addressing that cohort of brothers is the container, you know, that the message is coming through, which is us. And so if it's coming through, you know, a woman's body, there's a whole different dynamic that they hold space for that doesn't allow them to hear, no matter how reasonable, and that the message might be more better internalized coming from, you know, a fellow brother. I don't know. I'm just sort of thinking a lot because I don't spend a lot of time intentionally with with those. I love them from afar. And that's because my mental health and spiritual health is really important to me. And so with that being said, I also wanted to just sort of quickly lift up, oh my gosh, I apologize. I did have lost my train of thought, because there was a piece that you lifted up, Sister Bonsitu, that I wanted some further clarification around. But I think it's suffice to make the comments I've made already. And what I'm taking away from this, though, is just sort of like general application, is just thinking through, as I have conversations with various constituents in our community, what are some of the in what ways can I adapt, languaging to speak to that which is important to them and that which they're concerned about, and still connect those dots so that they are, they buy in, to it. Because I think a lot of a lot of challenges is just a failure, and you mentioned this, of communication, of messaging for folks to understand that this absolutely applies to you. We're talking about the full spectrum of reproductive health. It's not just abortion care. It is also prenatal care. It is also birthing care. It is also postnatal care. It is menopausal care, right? Mm-hmm. It is adolescent care. It is the full spectrum over the life course of a woman or birthing person. And so the messaging, and then that's sort of like horizontally, but even diagonally, like in different directions, looking at, and so, for that to happen, we need to make sure that you also have access to quality health care. You have access to affordable food. You have access to, safe and nurturing, affirming communities. You have access to employment assistance, and the list goes on, those social determinants we talk about. So one of my takeaways, I didn't put it in the chat, but just to end on this note, is also I'm learning to refine my messaging, and just be a better, more effective messenger. And then part of this too is being able to adapt it to the hearer and the diversity within our community, those various diverse constituents or components, how the message can be adapted to those ears, and even if we get one person, I'll take that over 0. So with that, I rest.
Thank you. Okay, I want to hand it back to Cicely and Gwen. But thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the time and the rich conversation and the discussion and the questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us, Bonsitu. You over-delivered. This was amazing. And I can imagine us doing this again soon. Thank you. We are honored. And to the point that you made about us voting, we really need to make sure that we support voters on voting day. Like Bonsitu said prior to, yes, have a voting plan, but we know that some folks will just show up. And if they show up, they should be able to cast their vote without any undue interference. And so the Wisdom Institute's Everyone Counts Detroit Coalition is a partnership of community-based organizers, individuals, organizations, and neighborhood businesses in Detroit's District 1 and District 2. And so this election, we are recruiting election protection poll monitors to support voters on election day. Folks need support. And so if you're interested in working as a poll monitor or know someone that is interested, we are hosting a volunteer orientation October the 5th at 5 p.m. in Zoom. If they sign up, or if you sign up to be a poll monitor, you'll be fully trained and compensated for the work that you do on election day. So I'm going to put the link to the chat for registration to the volunteer orientation. Please share this with your networks, but we need to make sure we show up for people that are showing up to the polls on election day.
I'd like to share that when we get right down to it, I'm hearing the huge necessity to adopt, as Dr. O'Hara said, to adopt languages relevant to the full spectrum of reproductive justice. And I want to invite all of you, if you're not a member of the Michigan Voices Education and Outreach group. That's what we are seeking to figure out what the messages are. You know, the political apparatus does polling and messages are developed and then they're sent down to us on the ground to use those messages. It's time that we create the messages that I hear tonight. You know, that whole discussion about HOTEP. That's something that's dear in our community. So I'm asking if you would come and help, all of you, help develop those messages that will get our attention. When we talked about being on the street, when we talked about reproductive justice in our community, that word just like people kept walking. When we said bodily autonomy, we said who owns your body, folks stopped and had a conversation about that. So we need some on the ground language, and I'm encouraging you to, all of you, to join the Michigan Voices Education and Outreach Committee, and you can email Amy. It's in the chat at Michigan Voices, and our next meeting, we meet every Wednesday at 11 a.m. and our next meeting is October 5th. This has been such a rich engagement. I know that many of you did not speak, but I know your minds were working. The expressions on your face have said, hey, this matters to me. You came out today and this matters to you. And I want to hold us up to the 5 points that Bonsitu shared with us. When you say have a plan to vote, that means you can vote early. You can vote now. Don't have to wait until the election day. And then encourage other people to have a plan, same thing. That means we're talking to one another. We're talking to folks. We very rarely, I don't know about many families, do they talk together about voting and the significance it is? Most folks say my vote doesn't matter, but I think we have a lot today that we learned this evening that every vote matters for the lives of Black, Indigenous women of color. And talk to community. This online life has been a real challenge to our being able to talk to one another. So figuring out how do we talk to our community about the Constitution, about the ballot initiative, what it really means. And we're probably going to be doing some play on what's being advertised now. And as Bonsitu educated us, helped us to understand what they're really saying, and we are the interpreters. We are the root workers, the interpreters in our community. So let's be doing this root work and this conversation and this community communication. And then I guess I've already said this, that our people, I love that, our people, our language, our community is perhaps our marching orders. Our people, our language, our community. And then visit the website and visit Wisdom Institute website. We're in this from many different perspectives. But the one thing that I'm really sure of, that my body belongs to me. And leaving it up to the state who has never had an interest in my life, nor my community's life, nor my children's lives, never. And so to lean into, oh, they'll take care of us, is absolutely insane, is all I have to say about that. Thank you all. If there's any, my body belongs to me. Yes, yes. Bonsitu, you might have signed up to get an absentee application. It will be mailed to you, but the actual ballot won't be mailed unless you fill out an application for it to be mailed to you. I just read that today. I thought I was on a list, automatic list, we sent a ballot, and that is no longer true. You have to request it. And I bet a whole lot of folks don't know that. And so we're here to spread the truth. Because when we hear the truth, we know the truth.
I want to get clear on this now. Okay, because they normally send me an absentee ballot. They probably send me a thing to request it, but they normally do send it to me. And I was just thinking, how do I make sure I get to vote before I leave town? So are you saying, or is somebody saying that I can ask them to send it to me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I already got my application in the mail. So
I don't think I have gotten that.
okay.
Okay.
Amy, do you know if you can request one online? You can wait for the application to come in the mail, but if you haven't received the application yet, you can probably go on the website and apply and fill out the application, and then they'll mail you your ballot.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe, I'm not entirely sure on the dates for this, but pretty soon you could also go to your clerk's office and just pick up an absentee ballot there. I can try to check in on the dates and loop back to y'all. But if you're really in a rush and don't think you'll, get it in the mail before then, there's other alternatives as well.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought that up.
You can
And also,
also
sorry. One more quick thing to add to that. There is often a way to kind of like forward your mail or ask your absentee ballot to be sent somewhere else. I'm not sure about the Michigan specific laws, but I lived abroad for a while and I would have my New York absentee ballot sent to my abroad address and things like that. So there are different ways to do that as well. So there's definitely plenty of ways to make sure you can vote. And I'm sure Ms. Gwen and Cicely can help you if you have more questions.
It does say that, that you can forward your ballot. You expect to be at another address. So we will be happy to explore any questions that you have. Because this is part of what we have said is our work, and for real, it's in perpetuity. This ain't gonna stop. This does not stop here. So we're in it for the long haul, and being in it for the long haul does not mean that we must, at our age, be the only ones. We have to bring our young people into this work, and that's the only way this work will be perpetuated. So thank you very much for showing up. It's 7:32. And we had planned to be here till 7:30, and it looks like we might have another opportunity to really have some more dialogue and some more ideas about our people and our language and our community. Thank you so much.
Emily, I saw you on mute. Did you have a question? Oh, yes. Thank you, Emily. That link we had put in my.gov/vote. You can see if your application for the absentee ballot was received, and then later you can track like whether they've received your absentee ballot once you've sent it back in.
Right.
Because some people don't know if they actually turned in their application. So you can track your application. You can track absolutely everything there. So
Thank you.
Thank you all. This has been wonderful. If you have any questions about anything that we covered tonight, please feel free to shoot me an email. I put my email address in the chat. We look forward to hearing from you all, building with you all, learning with you all, making sure we vote, all of that. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thank you again, Bonsitu, for the presentation. It was epic. Good night.